Welcome to the Omri podcast. Today I'm hosting a CEO of Docusign, which is a publicly traded company, a really good friend of mine. I'm really glad to call him my mentor. Dan Springer, thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for having me, Omri. It's great to be here.
I'm really excited to have you. Obviously, we met in San Francisco a couple years back, and it's just been a true pleasure learning from you from time to time and kind of picking your brain and meeting from time to time. It's just really great.
I've enjoyed it. You've been such a great host, having my family to Israel. So it's been a wonderful friendship for my whole family as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. So I'm really intrigued by it because the world is going through really unique time. There's so many disagreements and conflicts in Israel in particular and around the world, obviously in the United States as well. And I think one of the core values or maybe the basis of Docusign is actually bringing people together.
Yeah. It's funny, we make the expression sometimes we want to make the world more agreeable because we help people, really take their agreements and memorialize them, creating contracts that people can sign in efficient and easy ways. And you're right now in the world, from a international political standpoint, as well as within countries, and particularly the United States, we're seeing so much of this unrest. We realize we're not being very agreeable. So it's a frustrating thing for those of us at Docusign. We feel we got more work to do to have the impact we want to have. But it is a principle, as you said, and a value that's important to us to try to make it just easier for people to efficiently and productively come to those agreements. And that's why we're investing so much in that software suite, that really the agreement cloud, we call it, all the different components of helping people, as I said, memorialize those agreements.
One of the things that as a basketball player, I always kind of struggle with myself, and I think the teams that I learned that the most, I struggled the most was ego, I think. And how do I, not necessarily 100% making it disappear, but more often, and how do my ego fit within the team? And I think humbleness really can make a big difference in humankind. But essentially, when I played for the Warriors, one of the things that really surprised me, and obviously having one of the best teams of all time, maybe the best of all times, was how humble the guys are, how much they're willing to sacrifice for one another. Bringing a guy like Kevin Durant to a team that won 2 championships is obviously a big step. What do you think? I know ego is something that you talked about a lot. Do you think some of these disagreements are coming from ego and kind of, people want to make a name to themselves or whatnot?
I think so, for sure. And I think there's a side of ego that, as you said, can be positive if it's driving you to be your best.
Right.
But there's a side of ego when you're working with individuals that's fundamentally a selfishness. And my view has always been the challenge, particularly in teams, and whether that's the Warriors, as you said, one of the best basketball teams of all time, not the best. Think about your business executives that you create a team, or your whole company, or whatever. We're talking about your whole country. Right. One of the challenges is figuring out a way to harness the positive side without having the negative side, detract from what you're trying to do. And it's funny, I was just literally last week talking to one of your old teammates, Andre Iguodala, who has a new book out called The Sixth Man. Which is interesting. He's got a lot of stuff in there that's shows some powerful ego, but also an ability to be a fantastic team player. And he's actually going to come speak to the Docusign employees in 3 weeks. And talk about some of his experiences that I think will be really powerful for people to understand that. And I think when you have a high-performing team, as you all had in Golden State, it's because people said, there's a lot of great individual talent here, but they're excited to really support the talents of their teammates. That's one of the reasons you led the league, in assists. And there was a team that sort of broke records for having more assists, sometimes by a factor of 2 than, really other teams were having. And that greatness being demonstrated in supporting your teammates and being egoless, as opposed to just thinking about points scored. And then, of course, I think the wonderful truth about it was when you have that many assists, you got a lot of points being scored too, right?
Right. And it's
you're just moving the ball around and sharing it. And, you contrast that. You and I have talked about this. You've had other teams where they've had, players that have said, I'm getting my 25 shots tonight, and I'm taking 25 shots no matter what. And that's just how they're playing. And it's nice when you can find that high-performing team that says, I'm excited about, winning. And I think the thing you guys used to do in the Warriors, I love, there was that little thing there when someone made a 3 big pass, and it was all about the fact that, I got my eyes were open to see my teammates. And I love that. I love that,
Yeah, great.
concept. And it's great when it sets up someone for a great 3, as you said.
Sometimes it's unfortunate that, when I look back at my career, and I played 5 years in Sacramento, and in 1 year in particular, we had George Karl as a coach. DeMarcus Cousins was our star. He averaged, I think, 28, 29 points, 15 rebounds, a couple of assists. We had Rudy Gay and Rajon Rondo, and we had Darren Collison in his prime. I played, thank God I played for that team. And it was unfortunate that sometimes you kind of look back in retrospective and you say, you know what, we should have, we missed that opportunity. And that maturity, I think, is a great point of emphasis, I think, to sacrifice for the betterment of the team, betterment of the company, or the betterment of whatever you're doing. I think it's a great advice.
It is. It's hard to get everyone motivated to do that. One thing I would tell you is one of the best things to do is be open in your conversations about it. And from a business standpoint, if you have those sessions, or from a sports team standpoint, you have those team sessions where you talk about it and say, hey, this was great or this wasn't great, and here's how I felt you were supporting me when it was good, and here's when I didn't feel supported and I felt you let your ego get in the way. And it's hard to have those conversations, but if you can get to the place where you are, it really allows, I think, your organization to take off.
It's really interesting you saying it, because that honesty is something that players, I think, really appreciate. Even the stars of the teams and other players, from their coach or from within, the flow of information within the team. I think it's something that players really appreciate. Like, hey, say it to my face and let's talk about it. Let's figure it out and let's go together and hug after and battle together tomorrow against the Los Angeles Lakers.
Exactly.
Yeah. Dan, you've been, I know you were a board member of a couple of companies, and you've been the CEO of Docusign, and you've been for so many years on the entrepreneurial side of building teams and companies and making them really successful. Do you think at any point you kind of look a little bit, going to the future to be more maybe on the investor side, maybe take, the Warren Buffett kind of analog and maybe look at reports and maybe some structure that you can give them guidance and be more on the investor side?
Yeah. What's interesting, after my last company, Responses, we sold it to Oracle.
Right.
I had those few years, as mostly I was taking care of my sons, and that was a big opportunity for me to get some time, with my boys before they went off to college. And that was fantastic. But at the same time, I did join several boards, and I worked with a private equity firm and doing some investing. And here's where I've come out on it. Omri, I feel like for me, if I can still do it, if Silicon Valley, because that's where I'm going to, tech is where my career is going to be now. If they'll still let me run a company of scale like Docusign, I think I'm going to do it. I get more rewarding feeling from building a team and helping other people in their careers. I sort of more or less achieved what I want to achieve, personally. So now my satisfaction comes from really seeing other people reach their potential. So that's kind of what I would probably do. But there's going to be a point in time, it's a young man's game, and at a certain point they're going to say to me, you're too old. You gotta.
No.
And then I'm excited to do that. I'll be excited to do that. But if Docusign, I hope, is another long run, 10 years like Responses was. And if it is, I'll play it all the way. If something happens, someone bought the company, I might have one more in me before they'd kick me out. And investor, but then I'd be excited for that next stage. It wouldn't be that I'd be disappointed, but I just want to take all the swings. It's almost like, we've talked about, with you and as an athlete, there's a certain point where people are just going to say, despite all the talent, and then you're getting smarter and smarter, and that's making you better and better. But then the age,
the body, and the knees are not the same.
The knees are not the same. Yeah. When we talked, I remember the last game I saw you play. You had a 20-point game when you came back with Memphis to play Golden State.
All right.
And you said afterwards, we were texting, you were saying like, ooh, I'm feeling it tonight. You play that hard, and you can still get a great game in, but then it takes a toll on your body. And so at some point, whether you do your business pursuits, you're doing so many interesting entrepreneurial things, or, you do coaching or helping player development, whatever you decide to do, you can be excited about that second, career piece. But you don't want to let go. I mean, you don't want to let go of that first love that you have with the game until you have to, until they say, it's up. So that's how I think about it. I'll do some investing in board work for sure, probably for another 10 or 20 years, but I'm staying in this job till they push me out.
Oh, that's great. I think one of the things that I appreciate the most of playing basketball, and obviously, you make money and fame and other things, but these relationships that, long-lasting relationships with people that, first, really nice and helping you become a better person and make better decisions into your life. And I think it's such a great point of emphasis. I met you in 2017, and now we still, thank God, I think you count me as a friend, and kind of, when I have a problem in my, my business or whatever it is, I can give you a call and share some of your experience. And it's such a, such a great trait of people. I think that it's just a great thing. One of the things that the world is, going through, and is obviously the COVID-19 coronavirus. Israel, unfortunately, we've been going through a really hard second wave, or if you can call it second wave. What was your message as a leader to the company, obviously with all the uncertainty involved?
Yeah, well, it actually, for our Tel Aviv office, it's been particularly challenging. As you know, we were getting ready to reopen that office. It was going to be the first office, or in parallel, we're going to do with our Sydney office, that we were going to test coming back, because COVID was more in control in Israel and in Australia than it was in some other markets. And just as we were getting ready and planning that, and some of the other people in our building, you've been to our new office.
Beautiful. Right.
So generous of your time to come and make me a hero by having me show up. Everything I've ever done for the Tel Aviv office, I said, is show up with Omri Kaspi. But in that concept, the people there were super excited to come back, and a lot of other people in that same building were all just coming back too. And then the resurgence hit, and we had to put that on hold. And that was really tough for a lot of our employees. Are missing that collegial feeling, that attempt to be in the office and be with their teammates. And we also have some employees that have young children, and it's hard to work from home, when you have little kids running around. I got my 22 and 21-year-old. I find it hard when they're coming into the phone call going, hey, Dad, let's for lunch. So I think that's a tough one. And then we also have some folks that are younger that maybe don't have kids yet, but they have roommates, and they used to be, they'd be in the house only for at night, and now they're there and their roommates there all the time, and they're kind of getting tired of it. They'd like to get back into the office, but we just don't think it's safe right now. And so the message we've been giving everyone is we want to put their health and safety first. We understand that for a lot of people, it's difficult and it's frustrating, but we ask them to take the long-term view, and they don't want to, risk getting sick themselves or, getting other people sick. They have sort of a social responsibility we're trying to push on. And I think most of our employees they get it and they're comfortable with it, but we feel the stress. And so mental health is now becoming a big focus for us, in addition to the physical health, because it can be really challenging for folks to be quarantined.
Did you're quarantined?
No, I've been we call it shelter in place. Mm-hmm. You're saying try to stay at home as much as you can. San Francisco, where I live, as you know, is we've opened up some things, although I think, Southern California has just gone back and starting to close things that they opened. And I think we may find San Francisco hits the same phenomenon where we pull back, and outdoor restaurants and some of those components will also shut down again, and tell people that we really want you to stay home more to try to get through this second wave.
Did you guys, as an organization, and obviously with all the uncertainty, I think for employees is even harder maybe, and mental health is such an important topic. It's a topic that I pretty much talk about it in every podcast that I have, that it's, as a basketball player, you deal with so much at such a short period of time, and you're always under the limelight. You're playing so many games, and you got to perform and compete, etc. So I see a lot of guys that have been struggling with mental health throughout their career. I've seen them next to me. I struggle with it sometimes. Obviously, playing for the Warriors and getting cut at maybe couple weeks before the playoffs is something that you got to deal with. And how do you get out of different situations? What was your thesis as a company? Do you guys help them on a daily level, or how do you guys do that? Yeah,
I mean, we're figuring it out, and it's funny. Each situation's different, and you may recall that I saw you that last night with the Warriors. You're very generous. You came. You gave my kids a pair of your shoes. You were a hero. That concept of like last day of the season, going into the playoffs, and you were hurt, and so even though you're injured, and everyone goes, "Hey, we understand it," you got. I think it was your ankle still, right? But I remember all that conditioning you're trying to do to get back for the playoffs. But that concept of at least you say to yourself, you maybe say to yourself, I can't help it. It's not my performance, not my ability. It's an injury. But at the same time, it's still hard, or it's so mentally so difficult, because you're saying, I've been playing my whole life. I've been getting ready for the NBA playoffs, and I don't get that opportunity. We have employees that have things like that are so big and significant. But as I said, we also have employees that have small things. And it's just like, hey, I'm cooped up with my family for too long, and I have little kids, and it's hard to be cooped up that way. And so how do we help them? Each person's individual, and you can't sort of have one size fits all recommendation. Right. So we've been really trying to push our employees with some general things, like make sure you're getting rest, make sure you're getting exercise, do the kind of the basic things of taking care of your body so you can take care of your mind, but also making sure that we have ample healthcare services for mental health services.
Oh, that's
People
great.
know that the counseling programs available, but I'll tell you, I think the biggest problem with it is, and it's probably different for you because you had that intensity and you got comfortable that you knew, as an athlete, that you needed to take care of your mind and your mental health. Most people, there's a shame factor. And the big thing
absolutely.
I've been, how do we talk about it? And I realized that I wasn't that comfortable talking about it. I wasn't that comfortable sort of even, talking to our employees and saying, here's why we need to be thoughtful and take care of our mental health. So I'm actually trying to work on that right now. I'll give you one quick example. We had an employee in our Dublin office in Ireland who needed to take some time for himself, for his own mental health. And when he came back, he was open talking about it. So I was celebrating it. And I said, Owen, we're going to get in front of the entire office and have you talk about your experience. And I'm going to say how much I appreciate you being open, because so many other people are suffering from the same phenomena, but they're not comfortable, talking about it. And it takes a brave person that can stand up and say, yeah, that was a challenge I had and I dealt with it and now I'm better. And there's no stigma with that. No. It's taking care of yourself, right? And just like an ankle injury and a brain, they're the same. It's just, different parts of the body. And so I do think it's something we need to do a better job. I just literally made a conversation with our head of HR saying I wanted to try to get more vocal, because I know our employees are under more strain than they've ever had, more vocal about talking about it. And it's going to be hard for me. It's not my comfort area. Mm-hmm. And when I was growing up, it wasn't as common that people would talk about it. So I'm going to try to do a better job on that front.
Oh, I think it's a subject that it's definitely, I feel it as a personal responsibility to talk about these things. Going back to that year with the Warriors and right before the playoffs and everything is on steroids in a sense. You're playing for the best teams in the NBA. Obviously the idea is to win a championship and the pressure of being hurt. And obviously at this position, there's media and you back, what's going on, calling to my agent, and obviously my own drive to get back on the floor and want to be out there. And how do you deal with that? And it's actually a great point you brought up is if it's not in your control, don't deal with it. And it's something that I memorized ever since. And I literally every morning, sometimes I remind myself, it's not your control. Don't worry about it. Worry and focus on the things that are in your control and what you can really change and make a difference at. And all these different things can really, it made my life better. I know that for a fact. And obviously there's the factor of, people are shy and sometimes I talk to my mental coach and he says that guys sometimes text him, I don't want nobody to know that I'm working with you, or it's some sort of a shameful thing. Not at all. Yeah. I'm here talking to my mental therapist every once in a while about different things. I have more resources and I have more tools today to deal with things, and I don't need to talk to him daily. Sometimes I don't talk to him for quite some time, but I learned to adapt and to deal with situations. I really like. I don't like to yoga, for example, personally. Why? I don't like to do something to make me calm. I like to deal with the situation and be proactive to deal with the same situation. I think it's definitely a subject that needs to be headliners, obviously, and great you guys are doing it. How do you keep the flow of information working from home? All these guys now around the world, and you keep the organizational structure. You have 4,800 employees now.
Really interesting question as a leader, like how do you manage in a different environment? I think one of the things we found is that because our company was already distributed, we're in 15 different offices around the world, and our 4,900 employees are spread out pretty broadly. So we already had the phenomenon of doing things on calls and video calls as well. But it's different from going to some of the time to all of the time. And so I think the biggest two things I say is communication is just absolutely critical. You have to make more of an investment in communication. It used to be that one of my colleagues could just walk down the hall and ask me a question.
Right.
Now they can't do that, and so, or if people were visiting from other offices, or when I come to in other offices, you get a chance to really build relationships, in person that I think different, and it's stronger in some ways than doing things not in person. And so that's gone right now. And so right now you're saying communicate more frequently to make up for the fact that you don't have those in-person communication opportunities. And the other big thing is, is realize that you can't do everything you used to do, and accept that, and then figure out you might have to do things differently. One of the things that's tricky for me is, as I like to go and visit all of our offices and see people and take some people out for dinner and get that connection point. I can't do that now, but I still need to make sure I'm connecting with the folks in the other offices, well, including now San Francisco, because I can't see those people either. And so I need to actually sort of think about the fact that I need to build new approaches. And I'll give you an example. Some of our employees have been doing these happy hours where they've set a group of people where they might used to have gone out, and had a drink after work. They can't do that because they can't go see each other. But at 5:00, wherever they are, they have a quick Zoom call.
That's great.
So a video conference. And they all, bring a beer or make themselves a glass of wine or a cocktail. And they have a conversation where they don't talk about work. They talk just like they would do, catching up on people personally and getting those connected. So a lot of those groups call me now and say, well, I joined them. And I just did one last week with a group on the East Coast. So it was 2:30 my time, 5:30 their time. But I was sort of like, okay, I'll go to the bar. I'll go to the happy hour with you, and not talk about work. And we just talked about life and how people were doing. And there was, I think, 11 or 12 in that team, the sales team on the East Coast. And I normally would never join, that kind of a meeting. But now I'm saying, if that's how the meetings are happening today, that's where I need to be. So I would say focus on communication and be flexible to different sort of styles and modes that you might have to interact with folks, because you don't have the walking down the hall anymore.
Wow, it definitely makes you must adapt to the situation now and to be flexible and to the different methods of communicating. I'm a part of a company that, the CEO used to meet the guys every day at the office. And today they spend 2 hours every day from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. to talk about different things. And the marketing guy brings up his points, and the CEO and the COO and what's going on. And everyone takes a little bit of time to keep the flow of information flowing the right way. And it's interesting that they found that it's actually people become more productive, they work better, they spend more time working, and the flow of information was actually really interestingly to me was actually better. Do you think that's where the world of offices in some way would go? It's not even retail, but mostly I think offices and people working from home.
Yeah. Well, so here's what I think. We talked a lot about what we think the new normal is going to be. Mm-hmm. One of the things, and whether it'll feel normal or not, right? One of the things that we've been talking about is when we go back to work, when we get back into offices, however that, sort of normal is how do we make it better? What have we learned from this experience? And maybe we can actually make it better than it used to be and hold ourselves to sort of a higher bar than just saying, how can we make it almost as good? A lot of people are saying it's going to be harder. Let's try to make it almost as good. One of the things that I think we've definitely figured out, we have a lot of employees that we thought you had to be in the office 5 days a week. And now we're looking at some of the jobs when they're in the office 0 days a week. And we're saying, yeah, you know what? It's still getting done. Work's still getting done. Some things are getting done even better. And so we're saying, how do we leverage that? We have some employees that say, I have a long commute. We have offices in places like San Francisco, Seattle, Chicago, Dublin. I mean, these are places where it's expensive to live near Tel Aviv. It's expensive to live near the office, so people sometimes live far away. And in those situations, they're commuting and spending a lot of time commuting. We're saying, what if that job became 3 days a week, not 5 days a week in the office? And 2 days a week, you had saved those commute time to spend more time with your family. Wow. Or some with your family and some getting, even more work done. But that idea of saying, how can we make it better is what we're focused on right now. The bad part is going to be with social distancing. That's still going to be required, and some mask wearing, I think, for a while. That's going to make it harder. Elevators is the big thing everyone's talking about for high rises, right? You can't put so many people in an elevator for health reasons. So that means it's going to take a lot longer people are going to be lined up in a queue to be able to get, up to their building because the elevators will be less efficient. And so we've been thinking about that a lot and saying those are bad things, but what can we do to make it better so that it kind of counteracts that? And one of the other big things I think we've realized is that we've built relationships over the last several years with our employees, and they've built really strong relationships. They're leveraging those relationships that were done in person now that we're remote. So now we have to figure out when we get people back, what was it that we did around the interactions that people had such that they built those strength of relationships, which we then leveraged when they were out. And we're now trying to think about those kinds of things. We used to think about big events, it'd be like parties and events that the companies would have from time to time. Now I think we're thinking that that's not going to work. We don't want to get everyone, in one room. So, but what are the kind of events we've done that are smaller groups? And let's try to focus on that. So those are the kind of things we're trying to think about, Omri, to get to a place of get the benefits we have of having people in the office, but accept that it's going to have to be different than the way we used to do it.
Dan, take me a little bit on your thesis, because when me and you went to the office together here in Israel, and I wanted to, on the way to, I picked you up and we drove together. And I was thinking, and I was saying to myself, wow, you should really learn to see how Dan is interacting with his employees and how, is the speech that you gave them, or this kind of, you guys talked about the direction of the company, etc. And one thing that I noticed was really nice is that each individual really touched them, and you kind of talked to them about and the questions they had, and you stayed later and you kind of interacted with each and every one of them. I mean, you have 4,800 employees today. How do you keep, what's your thesis of kind of touching the last employee, or I don't even know how to call it the last employee, but touching, right, throughout the entire organization and really touching each person individually? Yeah.
So it's one of the hardest, points for me as a company gets bigger and bigger. And it's, as you said, it's harder to have, when you have 1,000 people, you think, how can I possibly have a relationship with 1,000 people? And you get right. 2,000 people, right? We're up to almost, it'll be 5,000 before the end of the year. And I think the reality is people are different. Some people really want that kind of connection with you, and some people don't. And some people just feel like they're happy to see you as more of a figurehead, the CEO, and watch you on the all hands meetings, and they can still have a positive relationship. They just don't need to have that one-to-one interaction. And so the things I try to do is figure out which are the people that sort of need and want that, and try to provide it for them. And for the people that don't need it, then don't spend the time there because it's not really helping them. Don't force it on them. And one of the examples I always tell people, if you're visiting my office in San Francisco, or if I'm visiting your office, stop by and say hi. And when I always make sure I have time when I'm in the office, or I'm just sitting sitting at a desk someplace, doing my work, doing some emails, but asking people to interrupt me, not necessarily schedule a meeting, but just be able to come by and say hi and ask a question or tell me something. And what I find is there's plenty of people who actually are uncomfortable doing that. So you don't actually need to have 5,000 people for your meetings. It's a smaller percentage of them. But the second thing is having multiple vehicles. So one of the things I tell our employees when we have an orientation for new employees, and by the way, this is a great example of what's better in a post-COVID world. I didn't used to go to all the sessions. We have them in Seattle, and we call it Discovering DocuSign. We fly in, everyone's new and they're employee. They come to Seattle and get to know the history of the company. That's where the company was founded. But I couldn't go to every session and join them. So sometimes I'd go if I could, and sometimes I wouldn't. Now that it's done virtually, I go to every one. So every new employee now that joins will meet me virtually for a 45-minute question and answer. I give a short presentation and Q&A. And I tell all of them, you now know me. You have my email address. Anytime you want, you can send me an email. And I tell all employees, I'll get back to you before I go to bed that night. One of the things I do that's a little different is I clean out my email box every night.
Oh, you do? So, still got 7 or 8 emails unread.
Yeah. So the thing
I do better.
Because
I got to do better.
Me is people say can't find the time to do it. If I go to bed knowing those things are there, it's hard for me to fall asleep. I'm thinking, I should have gotten back on that or that employee there. So that doesn't mean every single time I've solved the issue, but I at least respond. Sometimes I'll get back and say, hey, thanks so much for that note. I'm going to work on that with the head of marketing because we got to build that better campaign. But I get back to people. And that rhythm then makes people realize it's not that big of a deal to send an email to Dan. You shouldn't think of him as, sort of a special position because he's a CEO. We all have a job. and my job happens to be CEO. And the other thing I try to do to try to help with those communications is I tell everyone my theory of management. And my theory is what I call the inverted pyramid. So normally you think about org charts, you draw a pyramid and CEO's at the top and everyone sort of works for the CEO. And I say, flip it around. The pyramid looks like this. My job as CEO is to try to make you 4,800 people successful. How much could I do by myself? One person? I work hard and I'm pretty smart and I care, but just one person can only do so much work. So my job is to try to make these thousands of people successful. And if I define my job that way, I'm telling them, I work for you. So if you need something to do your job well, you should call me. And I walk people through our goals. We have sort of 4 big company goals and objectives that we're working on. I report every quarter with a scorecard on that. And I say to an employee, if you're here and you don't know how your job is directly contributing to one of those 4 goals or multiple of those 4 goals, and you talk to your manager and you still don't know, call me. I'll take any call, any employee that says, I don't yet understand how my work should be aligned with those 4 goals. Because that's so important to me, right? That people feel aligned. But the number of people that call me in a year to talk about it is probably 10.
Wow.
So, because most people, they understand what they're doing. They understand how their job fits in, so they don't need to make a call. But you make those aggressive offers to people, and even if they don't call you, they appreciate it. They appreciate knowing you're there, and then they decide, I can figure it out on my own. So that's kind of what I try to do to make people feel a connection personally, as you said. And then I'll tell you one last dirty secret. A dirty little secret is you also have to change your personality a little bit. Some people are introverted, some people are extroverted. I'm sort of in the middle. I'm maybe slightly more extroverted, but I sometimes have to put an effort in place to realize I can't remember anyone's name anymore. Partly there's too many people, and partly I'm getting older. And so I now have to realize that I'm going to meet you and see you if I'm in the Dublin office, and we're going to have a conversation. I'm going to be back in 6 months, and I'm going to see you again. I'm going to forgot your name, forgot what you do. But that moment we're together, I'm engaged with you and I'm helping you. It just means that next time, even though you may remember me, I have to start over again because there's just too many, people. And then being upfront and honest about it. And I tell people all the time, I say like, hey, yeah, great to meet you. And, tell me again, you're like 6'9", so I'd remember you. But, the people that are like normal size, I'd say, yeah, everyone kind of looks the same. And
that's the honesty though, I think.
Yeah, honestly say, can you tell me again what your job is? Tell me again what, your role. And then usually I'll start to remember stuff. And then I can able to say, oh, that's right. We talked before about that. And you're working with that big client or, whatever it is. So being upfront about that allows people to say, you're being honest with me, and it makes them more comfortable. So those are the things I think about.
I had a conversation with Steve Kurz a couple weeks ago about it. And I asked him, I said, Steve, how do you interact with Clay? And if there is a different language talking to different players, you touched a little bit about it. And he said, listen, the conversation with Clay is a totally different conversation that I have with Draymond. Draymond really needs me to push him. So if I yell at Draymond, he really gets going. But if I yell at Clay, he will close into a shell. As a leader, it's like, it's I think you really know how to touch each individual. But you said the triangle that you flipped it on the other side from the CEO to kind of help everyone up. And I think a subject that I'm pretty sure people are not really aware of is the complexity of going from a company, let's say, of 1 person to 2 to 4, 4 to 6, 4 to 8, or 4 to 6, and the amount of information and flow of information that are going between each other. I read a thesis, and I would love to pick your brain and see how do you see that from an organizational standpoint, is that they call it, I think it's the rule of 7. So let's say from the CEO down or up or down, you go to a team of 7, and then it divides it into a team of 7. And then, because your company obviously really excelled and developed so many different things now, and the amount of people that work grown exponentially. So do you go by the 7 rule? What is your rule of kind of keeping everything in order?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think the challenge is, what I love about things like the rule of 7, it's a good starting place, right? And you sort of say, hey, here's a hypothesis. I ought to think about it in scale. But I also like, on top of that, saying, hey, if the answer is I should have 9 direct reports or 8 direct reports, I happen to have 9. Even if I'm thinking about the construct and the benefits of those connection points with the 7, I might say, yeah, but in my case, I'm going to modify it a little bit, or maybe it's 6 for someone. But the value of thinking about those connections and the communication points you're saying, and keeping those sort of teams small enough that you really can look at each individual, as you said, and just like your example, with great coach like Steve, is that he's having individual relationships, with these folks, but he's realizing that you can't have 1,000 of those really tight relationships where you understand Draymond needs this and Clay needs that, because you wouldn't be able to handle all that. So you have to have your tight team where you really understand them to a smaller group. And but if someone can get to 10 and 12, even though the concept of 7, then great. Don't be stuck. And there's an expression I always love, which is a foolish consistency isn't the right answer. And you don't want to have it be a consistency that you're just going to stick to it no matter what. Be smart. But at the same time, leverage those rules of thumb. It says once you get more than about 7 connection points, the complexity gets so big, it's hard to be a successful team. And that's why it's funny if you think about certain sports. Take soccer, a sport you and I both enjoy, even though I'm not playing anymore. And you're playing. But you got 11 people on the field, and the reality is the game doesn't get played with 11 people at once, right? You have these little broke down triangles, and you have a lot of situations where you have groups of 4, and probably there's someone in the midfield and attack. Maybe you have some 7 or midfielders in defense where you got a 7. So you might actually be able to use that same rule of thumb and say that's the right way to think about it. But then sometimes you're actually in a formation where you're using 3 or 4, and that becomes the team, and the other 7 players are kind of watching a little bit or getting ready and in position, but watching the group of 4 do something. So that's all I would tell you. Is I think it is important to have that flexibility. You get the benefits of the broad insight, like Rule 7, but then be flexible and smart around the edges as individual situations require.
Then we have our general idea of Israel, obviously as Israelis, and we're very passionate about our country. And obviously the Jewish community in the United States is very passionate about Israel. Israel has made quite a big leap in the last 10 to 15 years when it comes to technology. And there's major corporations, obviously like Docusign, but others like Facebook and Google and Intel and other companies coming to develop their software here and do different things. Take me a little bit of your perspective. What do you see about Israel? Why Docusign decided to come and have an office here and to expand it hopefully in the future?
Yeah, so I think Israel is a great market. I think you're right. There's 2 big things that I think happened over this period of time. One is there's always been a focus on education and higher education in Israel. I think it's just a value, and some countries, I don't know why, have a bigger focus on that than others. And I think technology in particular was an area that people respect that. I think people in Israel also respect philosophers, and I think people respect sciences. But I do think technologists have grown in their respect in that last 15, 20 years. I think you and I were talking about Daniel Kahneman when I last saw you, and a person that is probably in the United States considered from a game theory standpoint really the father of that kind of thinking, and so that's respected. But this concept of we're investing in our education and our universities to teach people to have strong technical skills to allow to contribute to the software world has been recognized widely. It's one of the reasons there's venture capitalists. Israel is not a giant country, but a lot of venture capital has moved into the country because people see that the talent there warrants the investment. So that's sort of I think what started happening, and then some of those earlier stage investors, the Sequoias, the Excels, started coming in and making investments. People said, you know what, there's a lot of talent here. We would want to either do some acquisitions where small groups got acquired by bigger tech companies. We want to grow the group here. We see that there's a set of resources, and that's a big part in the software world, is you want to find those pools of great resources of human capital anywhere you can in the world. And Israel is now seen as a great place to go. I also think the location of Israel is really interesting. If you look across what we sometimes call EMEA, which is sort of Europe, Middle East, and Africa, Israel is actually in an interesting and unique position. Yeah, right there. And it makes it attractive for people to consider having offices there. It used to be, ironically, American companies all went to London, and now Dublin has become probably the next biggest market. But when you think about EMEA, actually, Dublin and London are not particularly attractive geographically. They're on the one end, right? And so I think over time we'll see more of that. I think Germany is going to benefit from that phenomenon as well and get pull from the technology industry as well. But for me, for Israel, it's the talent pool. The other thing I would just say that I think is powerful, there's a work ethic that I think we see in our Israeli employees, that I think the overall tech industry sees in Israel in general, where people are loyal, disciplined, and hardworking. And if you think about the history of the country, people needed to, right? I mean, you needed to work hard to be successful. And it wasn't the natural resources. Where's the oil? Where's the great soil? Where's all those things? It's not. It's freedom. It was freedom. But in 1948, and I think you might know this, but May 14th, 1948, I share a birthday with Israel. I have the same birthday as
wow. I didn't know
I'm a little younger, but not much. But that was a phenomenon where it's relatively recent, right? It's not that old of a country as a country, and the region, what was sort of Palestine, to use the English, the British term.
Oh, it was, right.
When it became Israel, it became a whole different place,
Right.
And that, I think, that ethic around people who are fighting so hard, for their country, their survival first, and then their success. That's powerful. I mean, that is a powerful driver of work ethic, and that's I think the reason the technology, education, and that drive that people have, that work ethic, is going to make Israel a fantastic spot for technology companies for decades to come.
It's a subject that in Israel and in the Jewish world in general, I think we talk about it a lot. I think the Jewish mom per se, and the part of the culture has always been of you must study. There's no such thing. And at a very young age, your mom, when you ask my mom, what you going to be? Are you going to be, back in the day, it used to be, you're going to be a rabbi, or you're going to be an accountant, or you're going to be a lawyer, but you got to do something with your life. You're just not going to sit at home and do whatever. Now it's computers and other stuff, but it's always about pushing and creating new things. And the fact now that there's the entrepreneurial side and the invention, and then the money obviously follows in a certain extent, and then you create better products for humanity, for society, and I think actually funny, that freedom you talked about of Israel economy. I think the point when the government kind of let it go and was allowing more of individual kind of success, and not necessarily success, but more of entrepreneurial life, and removing all the regulation really made Israel flourish. But Dan, I really, you've been a true friend to me and a mentor, and I really appreciate every time that I text you, and you literally either text right away or the next day. Sometimes I text you in the middle of the night when I'm in Israel with the time difference. But you'd be a true mentor for me, and I really appreciate you taking the time and kind of taking us behind the scene of running one of the most successful companies in the world, and you being one of the most successful CEOs. So thank you so much.
Well, you're very kind, Omri, and I hope I know you do, how much I appreciate as well the opportunity to have you touched my lives and my son's lives. It's been fantastic.
Thank you, Dan. So this is it for this week. Dan Springer, CEO of DocuSign. See you guys next week.